friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Swan Soiree, Totally Awesome, Mermaid for You, and Bicycle Built for You. So I have stamped those images out with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I wanted my swans to be a soft, creamy color, so I ended up going with E40 and E41. And I'm going to start with that E41 and add some definition to the body of my male swan. I'm just doing a little bit of a shadow on the back of the neck and the top of the head. Also pulling out the wing, the little feathers of that, kind of separating that out a bit, and then on the bottom of the body. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E40. I'm going to leave quite a bit of that white cardstock showing. And then I'm going to do the same for my girl swan. I'm just going to do the shading in the reverse since she's facing the opposite direction. We'll have a central light source on today's card. This is actually going to be a wedding card for some friends of ours who are getting married on the 22nd. So their anniversary will be 2/22/22. So yeah, I thought it would be fun to make them a handmade card, and I just love swans for wedding cards. I just think they're perfect for that. So I did grab my colorless blender and went over the edge of that E40 to just soften it a little bit more into that white so I wouldn't have any harsh lines. I also thought I would add a little bit of a pearly tone to that little pearl necklace, which is actually a tiara for the mermaids in the Mermaid for You set, but I'm going to flip it upside down and use it as a pearl necklace for my bride swan. And then I use the E40 to add just a little bit of color to my water lilies. I am going to add some more color to them later on, but I wanted them to have kind of a cream base, so that's why I used that. And then for the swan's beaks, I'm starting with YR04 and YR07. And then I'm going to bring in some T7 as well. I googled pictures of swans and used a few of those to kind of come up with a plan for how I wanted to do this. Most of them did have like a black area near the orange beak, so that's what I'm adding. And I'm making it slightly larger on the male swan and then a little bit less on the female swan, just to make them each a bit more unique. And then of course I wanted to add some rosy cheeks. I'm going to use R000, R11, and R20. Started with the R20, and then I'm going to go around the edges of that with the R11, but it's still pretty strong on those really pale swans. So I'm going to also go around that with the R000 to just soften that into that creamy color. And then I'm going to use some of those for the other color on the water lilies. I started with the R000, but it wasn't strong enough on its own. So instead I went in with the R11 and then blended that out with the R000, and that kind of melded with the creamy tones that I had already laid down. So it looked just like a very, very pale creamy pink, which I think turned out really well. I'm going to do all of the water lilies the same, and 2 of them are from Totally Awesome, and then 1 is from Swan Soiree. And the same goes for the lily pads. There's 2 from Totally Awesome and 1 from Swan Soiree there as well. And then once I have those pinks, I did decide to do the band of the top hat in these pink shades as well. So I started back with that R20, blended toward the right with the R11, and then finished with the R000. And then I'm going to do the little flower crown using the R20 and R11. just the petals. I'll do the centers a little bit different later on. I did go back and do a second layer on that hat band just to make it a bit more bright and saturated, and then I went over the pearl necklace with the R000, and then I'm moving on to some blues, and I'm using B41, B52, and B45, and I'm going to do the rest of the top hat in these shades. I wanted something different than black, just to kind of pull in some more unusual colors, and I actually pulled this blue from their wedding invitation so it would just match a little bit. I thought that was a nice touch, so I started with the B45. I'm blending out with the B52, and then I'll use the B41 for the highlight, and I did do 2 layers on that as well, and I will color the bow tie to match. So I added that B45 where the fabric is gathered at that knot, and then blended out with the B52 and then the B41, and then use the B41 for the centers of the flowers. And now moving on to my greens. I wanted something that was really subtle, had some depth to it, but wasn't like too bright since this is a winter wedding. So I went with BG93, BG96, and BG99. On 2 of the leaves I used all 3 shades, and then on 2 of the leaves I just used the lighter 2 shades there just to add a bit of variety. And then I'm going to start coloring in these lily pads. So the medium and the small I've actually stamped twice, but I turned them around so that it would give them a little bit of a different look, so that all of the little parts that are kind of cut in wouldn't be facing exactly the same. So these 2 that are kind of in the middle of the stack, I'm going to color with this trio as well, just starting at the bottom edge with the BG99, blending up with the BG96, and then using the BG93 for the highlight. And then for the other 3, I wanted a subtle difference, so I ended up adding in the BG90, and then I skipped the BG99. So on those, the darkest is the BG96, and then I use BG93 for the midtone, and the BG90 for the highlight. The BG90 has a ton of colorless blender in it, so it did push the BG93 so far out of the way, almost right up to the edge. So I will go back later and fix that, but I knew that if I tried to do it now, the paper would be too saturated and the color would bleed outside the lines. So I left it to dry while I continued coloring the other 2. And I'm now working on that really large lily pad, which I think is so beautiful. I just think these really make the scene dynamic and tranquil. So I'm going to color this one the same with the BG96 at the bottom, the BG93 as the midtone, and then that BG90 at the top. And now that the top 2 have dried, I'll go back in with that BG93 and add a little bit of that just flicked very softly in, and then very softly blended with the BG90. And now everything looks nice and smooth. So I will trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'm using the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil and blending on a little bit of Kitsch Flamingo Distress Oxide Ink up at the very top. I wanted my sky to be kind of like an ombre look and be darker at the top and then fade softer as it gets toward the horizon line. So I'm starting with this shade. I didn't want to go too dark. I still wanted everything to be in those soft, creamy hues. So I just used a little bit of pressure, not too much. And then I turned my stencil and continued down using even softer pressure and not inking that sponge up again, because I just wanted a little hint of that Kitsch Flamingo. And then I'm going to blend that out with some Spun Sugar Distress Oxide ink. So I'm bringing that color up a bit, and then I'm going to turn my stencil once again, and this time I'm just going in with that spun sugar so it's an even softer look, and just making sure that I have a nice application of color on there so that you'll see the difference when you remove that stencil. And then to get rid of that stark white line there, I just rubbed a little bit more of that ink at the bottom. And then I'm going to do some splatter detail just to have a little bit of interest in the background. So I'm pressing both of those shades onto an acrylic block, the Spun Sugar and the Kitsch Flamingo. And then I'll grab a little bit of water and spritz that kind of between the two of them. I like to go in with my lighter shade first because that way I don't have to clean my brush in between. And so I'm going to splatter that all over the background. A little piece of my paintbrush broke off there. And then I'll go straight in to the darker shade and splatter that as well. I did also want to add a bit of sparkle in the background since this is a wedding card. So I also grabbed the pearlized shade in my Gansai Tambi Starry Colors and flicked that on the background as well. This one is pretty subtle, but it does flash when you tip it into the light. So I will set this one aside to dry, and then I'm going to work on the water, and for that I'm using Stormy Sky Distress Oxide Ink to start, and this time I'm going to come from the bottom edge. So I want to lay that down a bit more heavily at the bottom so that it has the same kind of ombre look, just in the reverse with the dark at the bottom and the lighter at the top. So for the lighter shade, I'll bring in some tumbled glass, and I'm going to just sponge that right over the top edge of the darker shade. Just bringing that color all the way across and making sure that I get that nice fade that I'm looking for. I did have to work back and forth a few times to make these two colors blend together since the tumbled glass is so much lighter than the Stormy Sky. So I went back and forth a few times to just get them to blend nicely together, but still kept that application pretty soft so I would get that hazy look and it wouldn't leave behind like any dark lines or rings. And then finally I did go back and add just a bit more depth to the very bottom of the edge just to soften that. And then I die cut both of those panels after they dried with the large stitch rectangle stackables so that I would have that nice stitching detail all the way around the outside edges. Then I'm going to take the Stitched Simple Wavy Borders, one of those. I did the mid-size one, and I'm just kind of figuring out where I want to die cut that panel. So I ran that through my Spellbinders Platinum 6, and then I'm going to work on my sentiment. I'm going to just use the rest of that piece of white cardstock that I colored my images on and stamp out the sentiment in Forget-Me-Not ink. And I'm doing the one that says, "Wishing you a lifetime of happiness." And I did stamp that down twice to make sure that it was nice and bold and evenly colored. And then I'm going to pop my card base in the Misty, which is a piece of Moonstone cardstock that I've scored and folded to a standard A2 size card. It's 5.5 wide by 4.25 tall. And I'm going to do the little swans again with a heart and the sentiment that says, "Life is beautiful." And that leaves plenty of room above that for us to write our message to the happy couple. So now I'm ready to start the assembly. I'm going to take the pink sky and adhere that background piece to the card front using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. So I'm just lining that up and making sure that it's on there nice and straight. And then I'll take the water part and I'm going to glue that down to the bottom. Again, just lining up those two bottom corners to make sure everything is adhered properly. And then I can bring in my images. I'm going to start with my male swan. I am actually using a card sketch for the layout of this card, and I can pop a photo of the sketch that I'm using in here. This is for our current Lawn Fanatics challenge, and I am flipping that sketch on its side for this card. So I'm going to stagger where I place my male and female swans on there. On that sketch there were 3 large circles that were kind of toward the center. So the 2 swans and the large lily pad are there representing that. And then there was a variety of medium and smaller circles, and those are going to be represented by the rest of the lily pads and the water lilies. So I'm adding a medium and small lily pad to each side of the card, but shifting where I have them so that they don't look too matchy-matchy. So I have the small ones are kind of diagonal and the medium ones are kind of diagonal, if you can see what I mean. And then for the water lilies, I just wanted to add them here and there to kind of be floating around as kind of like the floral decorations as these 2 are getting married. So again, just alternating the style of the flowers as well so that they aren't 2 right next to each other that look exactly the same. You can see that there's not only the large flower, but there's 2 different small flowers, and each of them is a little bit different. And so I'm making sure to just spread those around to create more interest on the card. So once I have the flowers, I can start decorating my bride and groom. So I'm going to add those pearls to my bride swan's throat, and then I'll give her the little flower crown to wear as her veil. And then for the boy swan, he's going to get the little bow tie and also the top hat, just to make him look a little bit more gentlemanly. And yeah, so now I wanted to add that sentiment, and I'm using the same size and style of sentiment on the banner strip that the card sketch has, but it would have looked funny coming up out of the water, I think. So I'm gonna shift where I'm placing that and have it over at the top right of the card to help fill in that sky a little bit. I think otherwise it would have been a bit unbalanced up there. So I just added that and trimmed off the excess with my cutter bee scissors. And then of course it needed a little bit of glitter. What's a wedding card without some sparkle? So I'm going to add my favorite Stardust stickles, and I'm putting those in the centers of the flower crown, and then also just a little bit to each of the petals of the water lilies, and also to the pearls on the bride swan's throat. And my bottle got a little bit clogged, so I had to unclog it off to the side. I just used the needle pin from my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, and that got that flowing again. So I'm going to finish up with those, and then I wanted it one place on the boy swan. I didn't want to overdo it, so I just put it on the hat band. So I'll lift that up to the camera and tip it into the light so you can see all of that sparkle from that starry colors and the stickles, and give you another peek at the inside as well. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It really means so much. You can hit that notification bell if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have everything listed for you and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much again for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.